When I had just turned 29, I started hanging out with a guy I used to be friends with in high school. He always had a huge crush on me, but the feeling was never mutual. However, we'd occasionally hang out in small groups on the weekends, but nothing was ever serious. Just recently, we began talking again when he messaged me on Facebook. He was starting a clothing company and asked if I wanted to model for his women's clothing, so I agreed to meet up with him and talk about it in person. We met in a coffee shop, where he discussed my pay and work hours, and after a long conversation, I was all in. I've been working in cosmetology for the past few years, but I was eager to branch out into other fields. My modeling job would be part-time, but the pay he promised me was really good. Just through working together, we started to hang out again, and I actually started to like him. He seemed much more mature, funny, and seemed to have lost his very dark sense of humor that I always hated. After a couple months, we started dating and got a studio apartment together, where he assigned me with other tasks for the company that would increase my pay. I was really happy, but his old personality soon began to seep back in again, and I didn't like it. Whenever we had arguments, he increasingly became more and more aggressive, to the point where he was in my face telling me to hit him and see what happens. Once it got to that point, I knew it was over, so I moved out and blocked him on everything, in an attempt to distance myself as much as possible. Now that I'd left my cosmetology job to work for his business, I was applying to tons of different places. I still liked the idea of modeling, so I had reached out to several companies. One company got back to me for an interview, so I decided to give it a try. After talking with them, it seemed like a great job, and the pay was even better than my first modeling job. It was a locally run company, but it was taking off really quickly, and soon became one of the biggest ones in the area. Everything was going great, until I got a text one day from my boss to meet him after my shoot. This was something that never happened before, so I was mildly concerned as to what it was about. It turns out, my boss had gotten several anonymous complaints from other models, accusing me of doing and saying terrible things that I didn't do. I told my boss to get the names of the people, because it was clearly made up. I went home that day, stressed and upset, trying to figure out who was accusing me of all these things. I had no idea, and everyone I worked with was extremely nice to my face, but it really upset me, knowing that somebody was doing all of this behind my back. Over the months, the emails and letters continued to pile in, and I began to shut myself off from everyone. It felt like everyone secretly hated me, but nobody ever showed it to me in the slightest way, nor did I ever get that vibe from anyone. It led me to a very dark point in my life, but I stuck with the job anyways, because there weren't any other good options at the time. The company was doing a nighttime shoot, so I had to work at 7 on this night. To get from my apartment to my work, it's about a 15-minute drive, mostly on the highway. When I arrived for the shoot, I saw my boss's car parked in the lot with maybe 8 or 9 different cars. At the far end of the lot, there was a black Subaru Outback parked on the far end, a good distance away from the rest of the cars. This unfortunately reminded me of my ex, because he drove the same exact car. It didn't look like anybody was inside, but I didn't give it much time, and parked on the opposite end and hurried in. Everything went fine with the shoot, and after a few hours, I was finally done for the night. When I walked outside, I noticed that the car was gone, so I pretty much just chalked it up to a coincidence. But once I pulled into the apartment parking lot, my heart sank. The same exact Subaru I saw earlier was now parked in the lot. I didn't know if I was freaking myself out or what, so I called my friend to tell her. I asked her to stay on the phone with me while I walked in, and to call the police if anything happens. I walked with a brisk pace to the front entrance, constantly looking over my shoulder at the car. The entrance to my apartment complex has double glass doors at the opening, with several bushes along the sides. As soon as I stepped under the awning to walk inside, my ex came out of the bush and attacked me, and began dragging me towards his car. I was kicking and screaming, all while my friend listened in horror. He had his arms locked around my shoulders, so my heels dragged against the ground as he pulled me. I literally thought I was going to die. My screaming was so loud that I'm sure everyone inside heard, and I didn't stop until I saw a guy come running out of the building towards us. As soon as my ex saw him, he let me go and took off in his car. The police showed up minutes later, since my friend had called them right when she heard me screaming. I gave the police his name and address, and they instantly set a warrant out for his arrest. The next day, I heard from the police that he was found inside his apartment and arrested on the spot. The whole court process was a nightmare, but he was thankfully thrown in jail for assault and attempted kidnapping. I also learned that his motivation started when he found out that I was modeling for another company. He admitted in court that he was responsible for sending the anonymous emails and letters to my work. I never in a million years thought that he was capable of such awful things, but this event confirmed it for me. I will keep his company's name anonymous for my own sake, because I can't imagine what he'd do to me if he found out one day. I live with my husband in a ranch-style house. My father, who's turning 84 next month, lives in a nursing home about 15 minutes away from us. A couple months ago, I got a call from the nursing home. It was a recorded message explaining that the nursing home had a fire in the electrical room, but everyone in the facility was evacuated safely. The message ended with a number that family members had to call to discuss proper temporary rearrangements for the residents. As soon as I heard the message, I called the number and talked to someone about the situation. They weren't sure how long the building would be shut down, but I was told that my father would be relocated to another facility just over 40 minutes away, so I was put in a difficult situation. My father has dementia, and I've always tried to visit him at least 3 to 4 times a week. He often gets confused and worried, so I always try to be there with him as much as I can to remind him that he's okay. Well, with the new temporary facility, I'd never be able to make it out there and visit him, and they didn't know how long his facility would be closed down. So, I decided that it would be best to let him come and live with my husband and I, just so he wouldn't be completely thrown off in a new environment with different people. I ended up picking him up that day, and he came to live with us temporarily. He's still pretty functional and can handle taking care of himself for the most part, but he definitely needs to always have someone around. For the first week, my husband and I took turns every other day watching him, so I took off work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of that week. I didn't really mind missing work, because it had been years since I was able to spend so much time with him. This schedule went on for weeks, and the facility was closed down for much longer than we initially expected. Everything was going great though, until I was home with him on a Friday night. My husband planned to hang out with some of his buddies after work, so I was alone with my dad for the night. We finished up watching a movie around 9:30, and after that, he was ready for bed. We had him set up in the guest bedroom directly across the hall from our room, so I'd always be able to hear him if he got up to use the restroom in the middle of the night. We said goodnight, and I kept watching TV as he disappeared down the hall and into his room. I was exhausted from the week, so it didn't take me long to head to bed shortly after as well. I passed out pretty quickly, until I was awakened by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I rolled over and looked at the door, quickly realizing that it was my dad. The hallway light was on, so I waited up and watched the door until he went back to bed. For some reason, he was taking an unusually long time, so after waiting several minutes, I got up to check on him. As soon as I opened up the door, I had to do a double take. My dad's bedroom was wide open, and I could see him laying under the covers. However, the bathroom door was closed and locked, but the lights were on inside. My dad occasionally gets confused and locks the door from the inside when he shuts it, so this really wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I made my way into the kitchen, where I had a bobby pin sitting out on the counter from when it happened earlier that week to pick the lock. Just as I started fiddling with the lock, the toilet in the bathroom flushed. It startled me, as I definitely wasn't expecting to hear that. I stopped what I was doing, realizing that my husband probably just got home, and I was already invading his privacy. I walked back to my room and waited for him to come out before I went back to sleep. Another minute passed, and I heard the faucet running for a few seconds before the door swung open. The light from inside the bathroom lit up the entire hallway until he shut it off and it was dark again. I heard his footsteps walking closer, and as soon as he walked past my door, I realized that it was not my husband. I shot up out of bed to get a better look, and what I saw completely threw me off. My dad was walking back into his room from the bathroom, but if he was in the bathroom the entire time, who was laying in his bed? I tried asking my dad if he saw anyone else, but he was already half asleep and confused, so he wasn't very coherent. Not sure if I was losing my mind, I called my husband to ask if he was home, and when he answered, the feeling in my stomach got even worse. He was still out. I told him that I could have sworn I saw my dad laying in his bed under the covers, but it didn't make sense because he was in the bathroom the whole time. He kept telling me that it was probably my imagination, and even though I wanted to believe that, I know what I saw. I felt extremely on edge, not knowing what was going on, but my husband was already on his way home by this point, so I only had to wait a few minutes. I soon heard his truck pulling into the driveway, followed by the door slamming shut. I heard him walk in, then heard his footsteps approaching as his boots hit the floor. I was relieved to see him, but before I could even say anything, he said, "Did you know the front door was wide open?" I looked at him, hoping it was a joke, but he was completely serious. The last person to use the front door was my husband, and I specifically remembered locking it on his way out. This was the point that we started taking it very seriously. We went into my dad's room and flipped on the lights, then shook him to wake him up. We asked him if he opened the front door at some point, but he said no. Although he may not have remembered, I was hoping he'd say yes, because I'm 99% sure I would have heard him if he got up and walked all the way down the hallway to the front door. I'm a light sleeper, and I've woken up every time he's used the bathroom at night since he's been living with us. My husband has a gun, so he wanted to search the house first before involving the police, just in case it was some sort of misunderstanding. I was completely against that idea, but he insisted and walked down the hallway before I could even stop him. I heard his boots as he walked around the entire first floor, before opening the basement door. We have an unfinished basement, and I really hate having to go down there when I'm alone. There's only one light with a pull string that hangs from the ceiling, so the lighting for the most part is very shadowy in most parts of the room. The creepy suspensefulness of it all was enough to have me pretty worked up, and I got up to peek out the window to see if anyone was outside. As soon as I pressed my hands up against the window to look through, every suspicion I had was confirmed. The screen to the window was fully cut open. I slammed the window shut and locked it, then sat back down on the edge of the bed. A few moments later, my husband started screaming from the basement, "Call 911. Not even knowing what to say to them when they answered, I just told them that somebody broke into my house and to send the police right away. I waited for 10 torturous minutes for the police to arrive, not knowing what happened to my husband in the basement. I directed the police to the basement right away, and they had me and my dad escorted out of the house. Several more minutes passed by, and I watched from the outside, just hoping my husband would come out. Fortunately, he did, but he wasn't alone. A male who was maybe in his 30s came out in handcuffs, beaten up pretty badly. After what felt like hours, I was finally able to talk to my husband to find out what happened, and what he told me was completely unexpected. The man who broke into our house was my ex-husband, who was an extremely abusive alcoholic. He attacked my husband, but my husband was able to pin him to the ground at gunpoint, and he stayed on top of him until the police arrived. I had already filed a restraining order on him, so he was immediately taken to jail before being charged with several other crimes. After we broke up, he had sent me multiple death threats, so that's when I filed a restraining order. I'm just glad that everything turned out okay, and no one got hurt, but it's still disturbing to say the least. Not only did he break in, but he chose to lay in what he thought was my bed, thinking that I was in the bathroom. Even though he'll be in jail for a long time, we've still added a home security system just in case. I'm sure many of us have had an ex that just grinds our gears, but mine is fairly more creepy than the average drunk texting jerk. About 3 years ago, I was in a long-distance relationship with a guy named Peter. He was 17 at the time, and I had just turned 19. Peter was not a nice person to say the least. He thought that the first impressions he made on people were only necessary at first, because he'd instantly stop being nice, polite, or reasonable to people after the first meeting. I was young and saw past this, thinking I could somehow change him. However, this abuse towards people, including myself, eventually became too much, and I broke off the relationship with him. The breakup went smoothly, all things considered, except he wanted me to say the final words, so he could play the victim. This had been a core element of our fighting, because he hinted that he wanted the breakup, but instead of just saying it, he kept me on the hook and became even more abusive. I'm getting sidetracked, but the point is that I thought of the matter as resolved, and entered a loving relationship with my current boyfriend shortly after this. Then came the day where Peter wanted to get his belongings back. I texted him a list of everything he had left in my apartment, and he okayed that it was everything. We also made an appointment for him to stop by my apartment around 3 p.m. the following Thursday. I had no intentions of letting him back into my home, nor being alone with him for that matter, since he suddenly seemed to have many mood swings after seeing me in another relationship. He was blocked from my Facebook account, but somehow knew I was in a new relationship, which was a major red flag to me and my boyfriend. Well, Thursday came, and I felt eager to just be done with it. My boyfriend and I were walking home from our high school when my phone rang. It was Peter. He yelled at me, saying that he's been waiting at the train station for over an hour. I tried to reason with him, so we agreed to meet him there with his belongings since he needed to catch a train. My boyfriend walked with me to the train station, but we arrived only to find it vacant. I live in a small town, and the train station is mostly used during rush hour in the morning and evening. It's also located rather bizarrely among normal residences, and there are a lot of alleyways leading all over town from there. I got a text from Peter stating that he could see us, but he wouldn't come out of hiding when my boyfriend was there. We left his stuff on a bench at the train station, calmly replying that I'm not actually interested in a meeting with him. When I say calmly, I mean that my reply was calm, but I was shaking, and my boyfriend was furious over this child's play. On our way home, I received another text. This time, he stated that he had a gift for me that he left in my mailbox. This freaked us out even more, mostly because it indicated that he might be waiting in my apartment. It was entirely possible that he watched us at the train station and then ran all the way to my apartment. However, there was no trace of him, and nothing except a bill in my mailbox. By now, we figured that he was acting out of spite and proceeded to ignore the bombardment of texts, calls, and so forth that followed that day. After a while, life returned to normal. Then I got another call, this time from my ex's older brother, who was worried about Peter. Apparently, he disappeared, taking one of his brother's gas pistols. I was speechless, but since I haven't seen anything, I shook it off as another childish act. The same day, when my boyfriend was getting back home from grocery shopping, he saw police officers walking around the basement staircase on the exterior of the apartment we lived in. The next day, we were contacted by my boyfriend's mother. In the newspaper, there was a description of an unnamed young man from the same town as Peter, who had been arrested for attempted robbery of the pizza place I lived above. He was armed with a knife, gas pistol, and lighter fluid, while stating that he was not attempting a robbery, but was there to visit his ex, which of course was me. Contacting the police, I discovered that he also had a mask, fake papers, and a wig in a duffel bag, which he had thrown down into the staircase when around 4 p.m. he had jumped a fence and tried to enter the pizza place. This meant that my boyfriend went out our front door, while my ex was hiding right beside the front door armed. I've never been that freaked out before. The sad truth is that my ex never got charged with anything because he was a minor and had a wealthy family. I write this now because after 3 years, I thought that this horror story was finally a closed chapter. That was, until I received a declaration of love from a fake email account signed by Peter 2 weeks ago.